Right, we have two councillors that are about to walk through the door and join us. Moving on to attendance, staff, the appropriate staff are present for the agenda items. Confirmation of the agenda, and just noting that item 10.1 has been removed, the navigation bylaw one, and also 10.3, appointment of hearings commissioner for the bus fare submission, is being dealt with in the non-public section of the meeting. Moving down to item 4, conflict. Oh, sorry.
Just on the agenda,
Gary.
we received some additional information regarding the Kirrawao leases, regarding valuation that wasn't part of the public information. I think the suggestion was that we could discuss that in public excluded. Was there interest around the table in discussing that further in public excluded?
Okay, I'll get a feel from councillors first about your question, then I'll go to Nick just to seek some guidance from him. So, understand the question from Gary?
I didn't hear it.
Gary, you want to repeat the question?
Okay, so in the public section, we are being asked to approve sale of land, and the information provided did not include how the valuations of that land had been derived. So I asked for that valuation information, and it wasn't provided as an addition to the public information. It was provided to us privately, and I have some questions around it. The detail that's been provided, it concerns me a little bit. So if we discuss it in public excluded, it's not on the public excluded agenda for a start. And also we will have dealt to the issue or the item in the public session. Okay,
so I suppose a question for you, Gary, is... sorry, Gretchen.
To do with that, I would be wondering what the reason for going into public excluded would be. Yeah,
no, fair point. And my other question was just around, Gary, could the questions be asked in a general sense and not directly relate to the detail and the value or the information that you're referring to, the valuations?
Yeah, they could be. Yeah,
Okay. We'll just seek some advice from Nick. What's your advice to council with regards to this information, whether we could discuss it in the public arena? Do we need to discuss it in the public arena? And yeah.
It depends what the questions are. If they're just general questions, that we'd hope they could just be dealt with in the public agenda item. But if they're specific about the valuations, then, as we said when we sent those out, we'd prefer that that's done in public excluded, because it's part of the negotiation process, and we have other leases that are still to be negotiated. So council's position and how we negotiate those, we'd prefer that that's not done in public.
So, Gary, you indicated that questions could be asked without...
actually, on that explanation, they are specific to the valuations and the methodology, and so...
Okay, and just coming back to Gretchen's point, we need, I suppose the key is, what are the questions? Yeah.
Well, I think the first thing is also, what is the clause
that justifies
going into public excluded?
Yep. Brian?
I'd just like to support Councillor Callagher, and I think what he's asking for is some time in public excluded to talk about the valuations. I had a question as well, so I just support that. It sounds like part of it needs to be discussed in public excluded, yeah? So is that fair?
I think so.
Commercially sensitive.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I suggest is that when we move to
commercial
the item...
sensitivity, yeah.
It's section 7 to subsection I to allow council to carry on without prejudice or disadvantage negotiations, including commercial and industrial negotiations.
So what is the easiest way to handle this, Sarah, to either move the whole item into non-public, or when we get to this item and we deal with the valuation questions, that we move briefly into non-public to deal with them.
I think if I take my lead from you, which is generally you prefer not to have conversations in public excluded. So that being the case, I would suggest that you move to public excluded only for the questions related to the valuation.
Okay. Everyone comfortable with that approach? Okay. Excellent. Thank you. Right. Moving on to item 4, conflicts of interest. Just the standard reminder that we need to be aware of conflicts when they arise. Moving on to the public forum, we have Raywin Podolsky, who is here to speak to us about port noise and port emissions. Raywin's submission was circulated and diligent, I believe.
Yes.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Welcome, Raywin.
Other way.
Hopefully the microphone in front of you, yep, it's working.
I'll test it. Is it working?
Yes, yeah. So 5 minutes, and no doubt there'll be some questions at the conclusion of your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, well, you've probably already all read it, so I think it's probably better to just go through the key points. So I've lived in Roseneath since the early 90s. When we bought the property, we thought we were in paradise because we were at the port. You could see all the port, you know, it looks down on the port, and we all know how important the port is, but we were away from the noise and the smoke. It was like being there, but with in a special place. So when the Rio ships actually arrived, it was at the end of 2018, and it was about January in 19 that they start. We thought, what's that? You know, why are we hearing that? So you all know about that, and it's been very good what the port has actually done, putting the mufflers on. Kevin has put a lot of work into it. I mean, I think he even went to Scandinavia in the end to get them to put the mufflers in, and we were appreciative of that. And initially, when the mufflers were actually put on, Kevin he would email me and say, "Can you hear it over there?" And I said, "No, we can't." But it's not actually blowing, and it's not actually still. So it soon became clear that we could hear it a bit. It's nowhere near as bad as what it used to be. I mean, and I know that people used to hear it at the heads, if it was blowing southerly or if it was still, and as far away as the end of Maya. And I don't think it's as bad as it was. And the other thing is that when the ships actually arrive in the early hours of Sunday morning, even the ones with the mufflers, you can hear them arrive, because it takes, and I mean the port have said that, it takes a while to actually hook them up and get them sorted out. But you accept that and you think, well, this is not going to be around for too long. As last year progressed, it became clear that it wasn't just the Rio ships that were noisy. There's a few other ships. They all seem to be like, there were some called CMA Amber and CMA Coral, and they were really noisy. And just recently, the Spirit of Shanghai, Spirit of Melbourne, or not, might have been Sydney. Anyway, they must have all been built similar, because you know when they come, they're quite noisy and wake you up in the night, and you think, oh, there it is again. And honestly, we never had that before the wharf extension. I mean, I'm sure it's just the bigger ships, bigger motors, bigger capacity for containers, so more generators, or, you know, it's kind of like most people are saying this is progress and we have to accept it. But what I started thinking last year was, you know, this is 2019, 2020. There must be another way. And there's quite a lot on the internet about the shore powering of program in Canada, and both Montreal and Vancouver, I mean, they've had a government thing there and it was government subsidised. I doubt that it could happen here now, especially after the virus, but I and on their websites, Montreal and Vancouver in particular, they actually say they really go overboard about how wonderful it is. So I actually thought, right, well, I'm going to email them or try and find out a bit more about it, because you read a lot on the internet, but if you're properly looking into something, you like to talk to someone. And I 2 or 3 months ago, I messaged Vancouver, because there's no email addresses, and Montreal, I emailed an operations manager, and I never heard anything back. So the other fallacy, or I initially when the Rio ships were around, there were quite a few residents actually talking to Kevin about it, and I know quite a few people said to him, what about shore power? And he said at the time it would cost multi-million dollars to get the power to here. So I have actually spoken to some people at Aurora who talked to me about it, and I don't know that it's actually as just talking to them whether it would be that difficult. I do know that a container ship and a cruise ship, from what I have read, needs about 10 to 12 megawatts. It's megawatts, isn't it? Megawatts of power, and the Port Chalmers substation currently has 15. So, and on the website, at peak power, it's 7.5 megawatts used. But I know that when I talk to them, they said they use one and they have one in reserve, a wee bit like what I've been reading about what's happening up in Clyde, is it? They don't have a reserve.
Raewyn, I'm just going to ask you to touch on the emission aspect as well.
Oh, sorry.
I don't want you to run out of time, because I know there'll be some questions.
Yeah.
But, yeah, thank you.
So the emission, although we don't get the emissions, well, that I know of. On a really still day, it's so obvious in Carey's Bay in particular. That's why I put these photos in there, because out my front window, the one with the cloud of smoke, that was the Monte Rosa that had actually arrived that day. And it was just curling right into Carey's Bay. And then I just turned around and out my other window to Harbour Cone. It was such a blue skies day, and I don't know how long it hung around for. After a while it clears, but it would be so good if you could, get on with the emissions readings, but you don't even really need to get on with reading it when you can see it like that. And I know that the fuel has now not got so much sulphur in it, but it's still smoke and emissions. And that's actually the main reason why people are going for shore power, not so much the noise. I think they say that the noise is another benefit.
Excellent.
I must be nearly 5 minutes now.
No, sounds good. Hey,
Sorry.
thanks very much, Robin. I believe that your submission has been circulated to the port. I saw that somewhere. Someone has.
Yeah,
flicked-
if
yeah.
not, that's good.
Yeah.
That's good because
Yeah.
Brian.
I was just going to say this as a question on it, is like in relation to the emissions, ideally this council has a responsibility. Ideally, we put in a mobile measurer to actually confirm what that particulate profile's like, and that's something that I think this council has to get on with and has a responsibility, so thank you. In relation to the noise, the port, of course, has put in various acoustic work in certain zones around the port, and they've zoned it in terms of decibel. And so my question to you is, do you believe that the noise that you're getting at your house is higher than the decibel limit in the district plan? Because that's where it comes down to. We can make personal statements and concerns, but at some point you need to find out what that noise profile is actually like. Do you know that?
Well, I know that they tested it. They came to Roseneath and tested it,
Okay.
but they didn't come to the top of the hill. They tested it near the bottom, and I mean, any noise expert that you talk to says that it's. I mean, that's the thing about the whole thing. There are places in Roseneath that don't hear it because they're behind land masses and things like that. I don't think. Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't, now that they've got the mufflers on. I think maybe the Monte Rosa could be, and then but we are not in the port zone, and
Yeah, but that's another.
That's why I'm here.
And are they exceeding the limits for the district plan?
Sarah's got a couple of comments that may help.
Just two things. I understand that the port is investing in its own air emission monitoring equipment. And I also understand that there are shortly to be some discussions around port noise between the Port CE and the interim CE of Dunedin City Council.
Any further questions for Raywin? If not,
Yeah, you answered my questions, which was the age, because what used to happen was people would say that this was so much worse, and other people in the community would say, oh, but you shifted into a port. Can you tell me why what is the difference about that noise? We were talking then about noise and depth of sound. It isn't its loudness, it's the level. I can't put any other. It's a scale that it's on. It comes in right underneath.
Sometimes I have driven to port thinking it must be terrible right there, but in actual fact it's louder further away. It's that low decibel stuff. That's what sound engineers say. Yeah.
Just want you to understand it isn't just a question, and most of the people who've been doing the measurements haven't been as aware. I mean, we've had people who are musicians, who are recording musicians, who are talking about this. And a lot of people looked at shifting out of port, selling, with loss of value in houses. Yeah.
hey, thanks, Marion. Raywin, just on behalf of us all, thank you very much for coming along here this morning and sharing your concerns with us. And I sort of sense it's more than just your concerns. I think you had your neighbour also submitted a letter along with your submission as well. So thank you very much. Much appreciated. Okay, moving on to item 6. We've got Robin Zink, Enviro Schools coordinator, here with us today with a presentation, PowerPoint presentation, and that has also been circulated. It's in Diligent. Welcome, Robin. No doubt you've been busy with Enviro Schools programs, etc.?
Yes, just catching up and supporting schools to get back up and running again. So, yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
We're in your hands.
Thank you. I'll just wait for the...
Did you email it to that computer? Let me do that really quickly for you, and we'll pull it up.
I just assumed you would put it somewhere, Liz.
I'll put it on their diligence, so they could pull it up on that, but then you won't be able to see it.
Okay.
Just have to get to, unless you can log in yourself.
All right. Oh, okay. I can just talk to it if people have got it up on their own.
It's nice for YouTube to be able to see it.
Oh,
Well, it
okay.
won't show on YouTube.
Okay.
No, it
Okay.
won't, because it's just not, it doesn't work properly. It keeps shutting down.
I didn't realise that.
Well, I should have, oh, God.
So I can talk to it if everyone can.
Start talking and
Yeah.
I'll just,
Okay, I'll just start talking and hopefully if you've got it in front of you, that would be great. So, ka mihi kia ranganui kia papatoa nuku, ka mihi te ki te nao o te whaiau. Welcome. Thank you very much for having me here. I really appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit about what we've been doing in Enviro Schools. So for those of you who I haven't met, I'm Robin Zink. I'm the Regional Coordinator for Enviro Schools. Enviro Schools is still a relatively new venture for ORC. I think ORC agreed to fund my position in, I think it was either late 2015 or early 2016, and I started in this role late 2016. So just a bit of background from me. So you can place me somewhere. I grew up just out of Whakatane. I grew up on a dairy farm. And I think having parents who got me in the cowshed very early, I learnt I probably wasn't cut out for being a dairy farmer, but then I did go on to work in horticulture for quite a while before I moved to follow one of my other passions, which has been in the outdoors, and I worked as an outdoor educator for quite a while, and that morphed more into education for sustainability and environmental education over time. So what I'd like to do today is just introduce a little bit about Enviro Schools. I know some of you know quite a bit about Enviro Schools already, but for others it's probably not quite so familiar. Look at where it fits, where ORC fits in the Enviro Schools picture, and talk a little bit about the work that we're doing with the schools and community, and I also want to talk about two of the larger projects that were more long-term projects that we're working on. So our kaupapa is about creating a healthy, peaceful, sustainable world through learning and taking action together. It's very much a community development program that works through schools. And we view sustainability in a really holistic way, so it's about social, cultural, environmental and economic sustainability, which fits really well with the 4 well-beings that councils work with. Currently there's 84 schools in Otago that are Enviro Schools and 6 early childhood centres.
Out of how many?
We've got... it's 4% of the Enviro School, of the early childhood centres, 59% of primary and intermediate, and 50% of secondary schools. And in this last year, we've taken on another 8 schools and 3 early childhood centres. Our biggest area of demand continues to be the early childhood sector. If you move to the slide with the collective impact model on it, I can talk to our structure. I can talk to our structure from that.
Get onto my workshop presentation.
So the way Enviro Schools is structured, we have a Toimata Foundation is our national foundation. They partner with Te Māori Tau, which delivers a similar program to Kohanga Reo and Kura. At the national level, we're funded by the Ministry for the Environment, and we're partway through a 6-year contract with them, and that's coming due in 2022. Toimata Foundation develop all the resources, provide all our training and professional development, and they navigate between government, local bodies, larger community groups, and do all of that political work for the program. The next layer is at the regional implementation level, so that's where we come in. So there's 16 regional coordinators across the country, and then my role is to support the facilitators in our region that work with the schools. And that layer is funded obviously by the Otago Regional Council for my position, and each of the facilitators are funded by the various city and district councils across the region. In the Central Otago District Council contract that work out to REAP, and Queenstown Lakes District contract that work out to Wastebusters. So we have a lot of networks and a very collaborative approach to working across the region at our level. And then obviously the facilitators work with schools, and the schools do put in some. The funding that the schools contribute is primarily teacher time, not so much money. There's no cost to schools to being part of this program. And then we also get extensive community support in the work that we do. So some of the ways that looks is that we have a lot of experts who are willing to come in and help us out with the hui that we run, or work with individual schools when schools have got particular projects that they're running. We have a lot of organisations that support us. So, for example, we're running a hui here in Dunedin for students around transport in September, and Toitu's offering up the museum as a venue and some of their teaching resources as part of that. And then we also have a lot of businesses that support the schools, and one of the examples we have here in Dunedin is Bunnings, that has been really supportive with schools offering worm farms and raised garden beds and things like that. So it's a very collaborative approach that we take, and I think because of that we do manage to connect into a really wide network within the community to support that work that we're doing. And in addition to the funding that the councils put into the program, I also received some additional funding from Toimata late last year. So I got $11,500 to support some extra hui, develop some resources, do things like get some banners made and some logoed clothing for all of us. And I also got another $32,000 from Toimata as seed funding for the Sustainable Schools energy project, which I will talk about in a bit more detail shortly. I guess ORC's contribution is not insignificant, I would say. I really value the support and the contribution that ORC do make to the Enviro Schools in Otago, and I think it's one of the questions is, how does the ORC benefit from the work that we do? I think our activities support ORC's priorities. We help bring people and communities together around sustainability, and we contribute to ORC's social licence to create the sustainable future for Otago. So the way that we go about doing that is facilitators work with schools, and they work with a school to find out what the sustainability issues for that particular school and that community is. So it does look a little bit different in each school, and it's very much driven by the needs of the school and the community. We're not a program that goes in and says we're going to do these things. We identify those issues for the school, and then we work with the school to take action on those issues. All the schools in Otago deal with waste because that's a very real and expensive problem for schools. Most of the schools are involved in growing kai and sharing that kai, using that kai in various ways. Many schools work to improve school grounds biodiversity and work in community projects around biodiversity and water quality. And we've also got a number of schools involved in various energy projects. One of the things that we find is that the longer a school's involved in the program, the deeper their sustainability practices become, the more integrated sustainability becomes across the whole school, and also the more schools look for opportunities to connect with what's happening in the community. And that's one of our key roles, is helping schools connect into community and supporting those projects with community. So some of the examples, more recent examples of that are we've got a number of schools that are setting up kai share pantries in their community, so as a way of sharing the produce that they grow and encouraging the community to share surplus produce. We've had schools lobbying local businesses to change packaging on lunches that come into schools, and one of the ones I thought was really exciting last year was Wanaka Primary School had done a whole year of work on getting to know their place, and the Year 3 Wanaka students got really concerned about the tuna, the eels in Lake Wanaka, and about the fact that they can't get back out to sea. So they did a whole lot of investigation around that and wrote to Eugenie Sage with their concerns and with a series of questions. And she actually did come to the school and talk to the students about their project. And one of the comments that she made was that their questions and concerns had motivated her to go and talk to Contact Energy and find out more about what Contact Energy is doing around tuna and the passages for tuna. And it's also informed her thinking around protecting freshwater fish in this country. So one of the other things we do is, oh, look, there I am on this one screen.
What slide do you want to go to?
Where do I point it? Do I point it?
Okay, it's not working.
Okay. We'll go back to that one. Thank you. Other things we do obviously is we run hui for teachers to develop their skills and knowledge around sustainability, and also for students, and it's a way of sharing skills as well. And we run hui on a whole range of topics. So shortly we've got 2 hui coming up in Dunedin, one for intermediate students, one for primary, both with a focus on transport, and we'll be obviously working with the transport team here, DCC, Sport Otago, Well South and Toitu, getting students to think about sustainable transport options, and engaging students and doing some planning around active transport around their schools, and maybe getting them to think about some ways they could promote active transport and public transport use in a way that appeals to young people. And in September, we're also running a hui for Clutha primary students, looking at water and water quality and actions they can take to look after the water in their area. And we'll be doing something similar for Waitaki students in Term 4, and in Central Otago and Queenstown, we're running Queenstown Lakes District. We're planning on a hui where students come together and celebrate some of the projects they've been doing, because a number of the schools have been involved in some really long-term projects. So those are, and I know some of you came to the one hui we have managed to run this year, which was the senior secondary hui, and it is fantastic to have counsellors come to our hui. I know the Enviro Schools staff really appreciate that interest, and the students and the teachers really appreciate it as well, and certainly I'll be making sure that we send invitations to you all with information about hui and opportunities for you to engage with the activities that we're doing as they come up. Another key role that I have, in particular in Enviro Schools in Otago, is just connecting experts, community groups, schools, which is work that schools just often don't have time and energy to do. So that's one of the things we try and do, is sort of manage those relationships. And one of the things that I've set up here in Dunedin is what we call loosely the Ultiporty Environmental Education Collective. So it's all of those of us that work in the environmental education space and connect in with schools in some ways. So it's an opportunity just to share what we're doing, share resources and learning, and also hopefully connect with schools in a coordinated way, so it's not too overwhelming for schools with all of us banging on their door at the same time. So there are two longer term projects I just want to talk briefly about that we're involved in. And one is the Sustainable Energy Pathways for Schools. As I'm sure you're aware, about half of Otago schools still use coal as a source of heating. And about 2 years ago, one of the Dunedin Enviro Schools was targeted about using coal. So we brought together a whole lot of stakeholders at that point just to try and find out some ways how we can support schools to transition to both more efficient energy use and more sustainable energy use. With that seed funding that I received from Toimata earlier this year, we're working with a small number of schools and people who have expertise in this space to develop a template and best practice guide for schools around energy use and sustainable energy. And last week had a meeting with ICA, and they're really keen on doing some work in this space as well. So we're going to be collaborating on that best practice guide with ICA. In the last year, there's been a lot more focus on coal emissions in general, but fossil fuels in particular, and coal. And one of the ways our work is paying off is that this has been noted in Wellington, and it sounds like we might get some additional funding coming into the south to enable more schools to transition to more sustainable energy sources. So hopefully, cross fingers, that'll happen in the next few years. Alongside that technical component, we're working to develop teachers' and students' energy knowledge. So we're looking to run teacher professional development around energy, and with those 6 schools that we're working with, we'll be going in and doing some work with students around energy and getting students to do their own energy audits in the schools and coming up with their own strategies for using energy more efficiently in school. The other longer-term project that is only just getting underway, and some of you may have heard a little bit about this one already. It's a participatory, being funded through the Participatory Science Platform, and I'd like to just acknowledge ORC Eco Fund, who have provided some funding for this project. I'm really looking forward to this project getting underway, because I sort of figure soils, worms, poo, undies and dung beetles doesn't get much better than that for a citizen science project. So we're looking at working with six schools in North Otago to look at soil health, and students will be learning about soil, what makes for healthy soil. They'll be doing some soil testing, and the soil indicators that we're using are doing worm counts and getting the students to bury some undies, and then when we dig them up in 2 months' time, the amount of degradation gives an indication of how healthy those soils are. And we'll be introducing dung beetles into that mix as well. We haven't quite worked out how that's all going to happen yet, but that planning is well underway now. our role will be just running some teacher professional development for those schools and also supporting those teachers to work with the students throughout the project. We are going to be running a community day, probably be towards the end of term 1 next year, where the students can talk about their project, and we'll be getting in various stakeholders and community people to share their own knowledge about soil. And again, we'll definitely be inviting councillors to come along to that. It would be fantastic to have your input in that. So I think that's, So it's a very brief overview of Enviro Schools and our kaupapa and structure and where ORC fits into the picture, and how we contribute to your priorities. There's a lot of really exciting things happening in schools and communities around Otago. And as I said, there's a lot of schools that are really looking to deepen the practices that they've got going now and engage much more with their own communities. One of my roles is to see what the other regions across the country are doing. And a great initiative that some councils have in other regions is providing a transport fund for schools, because that's often the stumbling block for schools to get students out into experiences off-site. So this is something I'd like to explore more if councillors are open to that as part of the LTP discussions. And this is one way that ORC could support all of Otago schools and not just Enviro schools. I have also on Diligent, there is, should be loaded another document called Significance of Enviro Schools. It's been recently put out by Toimata, and it's just linking how the work that we're doing can support the work that councils need to do in response to the current both in response to COVID and in response to climate change. You can find out more about Enviro Schools at our website, and we do have a Facebook page for the Otago Enviro Schools as well. Once again, thank you very much for your time and for allowing me to just talk a little bit about Enviro Schools. I really appreciate this opportunity. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Robin.
Thank you.
A couple of things. Thanks for handling the IT glitch so professionally. Brilliant. And it seems to me, as the regional coordinator, you would have noticed a significant change in terms of the scope of activities, from edible gardens so many years ago, a decade ago or whatever, and now you're dealing with transport issues, energy, sustainable sources and soil health, etc. So it's changed significantly, obviously, the scope, which is great. I'll check if there are any questions. Michael, Marion, Carmen.
Robin, thank you. Toimata Foundation, could you tell us a bit more about that? Because it's not something I'm all that familiar with.
So it used to be called the Enviro Schools Foundation and then changed its name, I think, about 4 or 5 years ago.
Where's this money come from?
So that's funded through the Ministry for the Environment at the moment. They're based up in Kirikiriroa in Hamilton. It is our national foundation. It's a charitable trust.
I should have known that, but...
Marion.
I'm thrilled because the Ultiporty Environment Education Collective, that's what I was really quite excited about. Can I just check? You've got Town Belt people in there, and the lovely young man I see just got onto the Conservation Board.
Taylor.
Yes. Isn't it fabulous?
He is fabulous.
And there's this new group that's working out in the North East Valley.
Open View and
and some of the other, okay.
Yep.
And of course, the Mad Lady of Orokonui.
Yes.
I mean, she's a wonderful lady.
Yes.
The second thing I just want to say to you is energy in schools. I understand that in the hospital rebuild, the university and the hospital are going to be fueled by something other than coal. And, it might be worthwhile popping in.
I have been talking with them.
You have. Thank you. That's right. I don't have to teach you anything. And I'll be very supportive of some work on transport. So thanks very much, Robin. That's great.
Thank you. Carmen.
Thank you through the chair. Robin, and this is really great, as always, and it's good to see you back year after year. So I have a couple of questions for you. I see you've got more into the littlies, the wee jiggers, which is great. And one question I'd like to ask you is, we talked about our carbon footprint. How would you see what you do, starting with the wee jiggers right up through, because each primary, secondary, and the little jiggers themselves will have different understandings of our carbon footprint, but it's really important that we try and have some measure. How do you see what you do can get that into those schools right up through the tiers and make that difference, so they understand that it's something that will be in their lives every day? It's my first question to you. I've got a couple more if you can indulge with me, but that would be my first one.
So yeah, we're talking a lot more around climate change right through from ECE level right through, and obviously you do adjust what you're talking at those levels. But the fantastic thing with working at the ECE level is that you connect in with families really strongly, much more strongly than you do at primary and secondary level. So we can have some quite sophisticated conversations with the families at that level. Everything that we talk about in Enviro Schools, whether it's about waste, whether it's growing our own food, it's got a component of how we're looking after the place that we're living in, and that's where we sort of hook in with the carbon footprint stuff as well. What can we do to make sure that we're looking after Papatūānuku and the world that we're living? And certainly both students and teachers are asking for more resources around understanding how does carbon work, what are the carbon footprint tools that we can use, and we're still working on finding some. There are more out there, and it'd be great to have some that are a little bit more user friendly for students. But yeah, great tool for engaging students with and helping them understand how the carbon cycle works.
Just on that, but this is not my second question, still my first. Can you see somehow us developing some technology like with Otago Polytech Engineering or something like that we have an app? We've been talking about this.
I think that would be the way to go, because an app it's immediate response, and I think it's, as with any of those things, I bike to work most days for a whole range of reasons, but it would actually be sometimes quite nice to go, actually, by biking to work, I've reduced my carbon footprint by this amount.
and it's real time too, isn't it?
Yes, it's real time, and I think that's for a sector of the population, that's really motivating to be able to see that.
And my second question and my third question are sort of interrelated. The transportation hui that you have in September, that's obviously open to all Otago students?
No,
have you done it?
It's for Dunedin.
Yeah. Okay. So that brings me to that second and last question, which is the rural children, that we don't miss out on them. So there's two parts to that. How do we engage with them as well in transportation, because it's so much more difficult when you don't have any? And number two, the second part to this through the chair is when I first came here, there was nothing in Waitaki. And you remember that? We built that up and really encouraged it, and it's terrific. And now, is there areas, if you like, that are lagging behind, or areas that you're still trying to tap into in our rural site databases? Is it still hard, or is it getting easier, or is it more getting the coordinators?
Basically, it's a resource issue for us now. There are more and more schools inquiring about being an Enviro school, and I certainly don't, because we're at capacity So we've got all of the schools in Central Otago involved in Enviro Schools, all but two in Queenstown Lakes District. And then we're at capacity in Clutha, Dunedin and Waitaki. So at the moment we can't take on any more schools, and that's it's a resource issue, facilitator time
issue. You don't want to, it's just you're tight for...
Yeah, so I'm obviously not promoting Enviro Schools in those areas because we can't do anything about it, but I am getting regular requests from schools in those areas, and I just keep a database of those schools, and hopefully once we get some more funding we'll be able to work with more schools.
Is there anything you can give them in the interim that keeps encouraging them, even though it's tricky that there is...
Yeah, it is a little tricky because of the funding, our funding constraints. So all I can do really is link them into the website and our Facebook page, and then send them newsletters and things like that. So I do that.
Kate, Brian, Kevin.
Thank you. That question leads into mine, which is the equity of a school that's been in for a long time. I presume they never fall off, and yet a school that wants to get in can't. Is that how it works?
We do have schools that step down.
Okay.
So
yeah.
for a whole range of reasons.
Yeah.
And if schools are no longer engaging with us, we do have those conversations whether this is still the program that they want to be in.
Yeah.
If you've been involved with schools, you'll know that happens. So it comes and goes. So as long as we know what's going on, they stay engaged. But
Okay. Well, the question then is it our funding and resourcing that's holding you up, or is it at a different level?
No, it's at the council, at the district TA level. I find the result. I'm really well resourced.
So the question then is whether we should be encouraging during the LTP to, I presume, a submission to the DCC to up their game to provide and Queens and Clutha.
Yeah.
Okay. No, that's just understanding that.
Yeah.
The other question I had through you, Mr. Chairman, is understanding how we can hear what these kids are saying and learning, apart from coming to Hui, because the transport one is one that's obvious. We're about to do a regional passenger transport. Is that why you've chosen it, or is it coming from the other way? It's an area we haven't focused on for quite a while, and for Dunedin in particular, because we have so many other options in terms of transport, it was just like it's timely again. Timely to focus on that, and partly some of the conversations wider. Can I ask a third question?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Sorry, at the catchments groups, we're starting some catchment groups and some are going. What is the link between Enviro Schools and catchment groups? Because they can mutually learn from each other. And do we, because you're in the building, but the other Enviro Schools people aren't in the building, I get that.
Yeah.
Do we try and match those things up so that we've got children teaching the adults as well?
So the Soil Yarandis project is with Mosleyan and East Otago catchment group. Some of the schools are already doing some work with the Manahirakia catchment group, and schools are already doing work with the Upper Clutha water group. But anything that facilitates those relationships is fantastic because, as I say, schools want opportunities to connect in with those community groups.
Great.
Brian.
I want Enviro Schools to be really successful. As a governor, I really don't know how successful Enviro Schools is. Like the touchy-feely stuff is that it's working really well. So maybe, next presentation, I'd love to see some feedback, big picture feedback in terms of to give me confidence that it is successful, that it is growing, that it is evolving. So for example, you may have surveys or whatever. I'd be interested to know what your aims are, and as Councillor Wilson said, what are the constraints? So for example, is your aim to be at all schools, all preschools, all secondary schools? I want to know where it's going so that we can support you, and I want it to be successful. All I really know at this point is there's lots of stuff going on, and it sounds really great, and it's wonderful. Strategically, I'd just like a little bit more information so we know what we can do to assist you, and for this to be really successful. Thank you. Hey, thank you for your work, Robin. Marvellous. I look forward to the next presentation.
Robin goes to the March for Climate Change and sees all the students in.
Kevin.
Thanks.
No, I'm
Thank
good.
you, Councillor.
You're good. Thank you. No further questions? Well, look, just on behalf of everybody, Robin, thank you very much. Keep up the good work. Very impressed with what's happening out there in the school sector and early childhood sector. So good luck.
Yes, and thank you for your ongoing support. We do really appreciate that.
Lovely.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay, councillors, moving on to item 7, confirmation of minutes. Before I start those, let's aim to have a break about 10:30-ish for about 15 minutes, just to keep in mind. So the minutes of the 24th of June 2020 council meeting, would someone like to move the true and correct? Move Carmen, seconded Michael Decker. Any discussion? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Minutes of the meeting on the 8th of July 2020. I will move, seconded by Carmen. Any discussion?
Yes, please.
Marion.
On page 2 of those minutes, at the end of the first paragraph on page 2, it said, she also asked Councillor Laws to lead the charge to rebuild a unified rural community in Central Otago. I would either like the words added by withdrawing his defamation case, or I'd like the whole sentence removed. Doesn't make sense.
Okay, sorry, Marion, just remind me which paragraph we're on. We're under
It's page 2, and it's the top paragraph, and it's the last sentence in the top paragraph.
Still yet to find it because...
Page 16, last sentence, is that right?
15 on mine.
Oh. So, okay. So is it at the conclusion of... tell me which paragraph under 6.1, because my page number...
Okay, under 6.1 we've got 1 paragraph, 2, 3, 4, and it's at the bottom of the 4th paragraph.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
16.
Okay, so your question is you'd like that removed?
I'd either like the sentence removed, or I'd like added in by withdrawing his defamation case.
Hang on. Could you just... Okay.
That's what I said.
What I
Pull
suggest
out the
is...
speech.
Well, we've got it on YouTube. I heard it too.
Yes.
Okay, right. Okay. Okay, Michael?
I was just going to support the councillor. That's what she said, and it's not properly recorded in the minutes.
Yeah, no,
No, it's
fair
not
enough.
fair,
Yeah,
that's right.
okay.
All right.
So
I'll let you know what
you're comfortable.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
No, I have it in here and I
Thank you.
took it out.
Thank you.
Strong
Okay.
like that.
So we'll move that amendment. Moved Marion, seconded Michael Laws. Okay.
I'm
Any
not seconding it, I'm just agreeing with it.
Well, okay. I'll second it.
Okay.
Okay. Any discussion? If not, I'll put the motion to that amendment to the minutes for the 8th of July. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Problems. And I'll put the substantive motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Okay, moving on to actions.
What's happened to the Aurora energy price increase work?
Michael, Laws?
Sorry, that's to come. That's been delayed because actually I'll put this on the record. That's been delayed because Aurora have changed the conditions on which we were going to be submitting on. So they've got a new proposal before the Commerce Commission, and so they've also delayed the time when that will be available. So it will come to the meeting of 12th of August for formal adoption by our council.
Any other comments or questions on actions? Hilary?
I find this a bit difficult to get my head around what's going on with them, in that I would like something in the last column that question was a question that I think arose out of these all being described as in progress or assigned, some of which have something after that, but the fact that something's assigned isn't an action. It doesn't say where it's got to or when it will come back to us or when it's doing anything or whatever. I would quite like the perhaps just the update column filled in, so as having assigned it, where does it go then? It's not a sort of an action really for me.
Yeah. Okay. So it's sort of it's going along a journey, but you just sort of want to know where it's at in terms of the journey it's on.
So assigned governance, assigned Nick, assigned Councillor Malcolm.
So if there was some sort of guidance that
some sort of where
it was going to arrive back here.
What is it up to?
6 months or okay. Point taken. Thank you.
And subsequent to that, what is the mechanism to update that column?
Just tell you. Yeah. Cool.
Everyone's got that? Just liaise with Liz. Okay. Comfortable? Moving on. Okay, Chairperson and Chief Executive's report. I'll just take the Chairperson's report as read. Any queries, questions? I should comment that on the second page, this is to do with the standing committees and committees of council. Emergency management Otago should have been a bullet point, my mistake there on its own. Yeah. Okay, Alexa.
I'm just wondering if you could flesh out a bit about the regional sector group. We've got the water reform and what was actually happening.
Yep. Yeah.
Transport biodiversity. If you had a chance to tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. To be perfectly honest, there is a fair bit happening.
Is there?
But I suppose the main theme, and I'll probably just touch on the Action for Fresh Water and Jobs for Nature. In both those spaces, there's a real emphasis this is the feedback from the regional sector group that had presentations from MFE, Department of Conservation, Transport, and all those presentations that we heard. It's very much the government emphasising the need for us to work collaboratively together, whether it's in whichever area. I suppose there's more of a push for MFE and MPI to be talking closely together, for MPI and the regional councils to be joined at the hip, I think was the term used. So I suppose a greater emphasis on being more aligned to where the government want us to go. Jobs for Nature, obviously there's a lot of opportunity there, and I suppose the other key message there is, looking for alliances within, or, groups coming together, whether it's on a regional basis or even greater than that. So I suppose that's the general theme. They're looking, I suppose, for regional councils to show leadership in those spaces. Yeah. I don't know, Sarah, did you want to add?
Is there a website or anything where we're able to see some of those presentations? No, it's not. Okay.
No, the important thing about RSG is that it is a forum that receives information because it has the confidence of government, and the point at which it receives that information is not a point at which it's necessarily public. So no, there really isn't a website. I took some fairly...
You do get a lot of things though sent through that come through LGNZ.
You do, that's true. Hang on, let me have a look. So my notes, the Chief Executive who is replacing Malcolm Alexander is Susan Freeman, who was the former CEO of Engineering New Zealand, and Dave Cull will be finishing on the 21st of August and Malcolm on the 28th of August. So it's a complete change of leadership at the top of GNZ. There was a discussion around Three Waters, not a lot that I can talk about, but quite a concern around, I guess, the speed at which infrastructure has been improved and invested in, and the decisions that are made at TA level, and what that means for compliance during Three Waters reform. So there was a discussion around that, and I think Otago's on the right track in terms of the work that it has proposed through the Mayoral Forum, which is around Otago Southland coming together and talking about what Three Waters might look like for us. And we've received some funding to do that, or are about to. So that's, we're on the right track there. We probably actually, Hawke's Bay is the other one who has received funding, so we're probably a little ahead in that conversation. The signal is that the regional sector will have a role in Three Waters, and it might be quite significant. There are Three Waters roadshows next week, and it's very important that we're seen at those roadshows. That was the signal that was given. What else? And the roadshows are really sort of tranche one, or talking about tranche one of the reform, and in particular Three Waters investment, and what that means, and also this, the opting in of supplying data in relation to Three Waters. Right, okay. We also heard from the new drinking water regulator around what that looks like. I think it's fair to say that, as Andrew said, there's a lot of demand on the sector at the moment, and there is a growing awareness, I think, and an increase in humbleness, perhaps, but awareness that the sector must deliver. So we're getting a lot of money at the moment in various ways through Jobs for Nature green projects, the infrastructure fund, but actually the pressure is really on to make sure we spend that money and deliver in the timeframes that have been committed to in the bids that have been made. There was some discussion about biodiversity. Again, money coming through for particularly 100 million for wildings and 25 million for wallabies. So, you know, that's a really good outcome, but again, we have to deliver. And fresh water, again, we need to work together. That's the other really strong theme, is we need to work together, and the relationship between central government and the regional sector and iwi leaders is paramount to that. So there's a delivery model that's being considered at the moment that was proposed by chief executives in terms of how do we do a whole lot of the work that each council would have to do individually in setting up for the implementation of the new freshwater policy. How do we do that as a collective and do that together so that we do it once and have consistency? That doesn't take away the ability of each individual council to then have its own implementation plan and program. It just means that if you're trying to figure out, you know, what does X mean, you do that once as a sector rather than doing it 16 times. So we need to be ready to participate in that, and that does mean resources. But also that will be a partnership with central government and others, iwi in particular. Ka hui wai Māori are involved with that. Yeah, so partnership is becoming incredibly important in the way that we deliver. There's possibility there'll be an NES for wastewater.
Distinct from inside the Three Waters.
Eh?
It's distinct from inside the Three Waters.
That came from GIA, so it's part of the whole reform package, I suspect. Some interesting facts. Bill Bayfield, who's the interim CE for Taumata Arawai, which is the drinking water regulator. 800,000 people in New Zealand don't know what the quality of the water is that they get from their taps. And the idea is that people actually can have confidence in what their drinking water is providing. The drinking water regulator is a Crown agent, so it has a board and a Māori advisory committee. And there's quite a reset going on, I think, in terms of drinking water. So, you know, that partnership with iwi and the recognition that water is something much greater for iwi than perhaps it is for us in terms of its mana and its wairua. So that was talked about. They're looking to lift the whole capability of the whole system for drinking water. So that's across suppliers, across industry, across agencies like ours. For example, the public also have very limited understanding in their view of the environmental performance of wastewater and stormwater, and that's something that they're thinking about, and recognising that tension, I guess, between the economics of providing those services and environmental outcomes. They're going to need some help. There has to be, they're talking about a wastewater register, and we will have a role in supporting with that. Okay, Jobs for Nature. We actually had to leave sort of in the middle of that, but really there's 500 proposals currently looking for funding. They're trying to be efficient about that. They really need regional alliances that include regional councils and iwi and government, but also it's really important that you have that community representation as well, and the delivery is the really important piece, because that's what actually results in jobs and also the outcomes. So yeah, that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Thanks, Sarah. How about we just deal with questions on both reports, and then we can just receive them at the end. So we've got Hilary, Michael Laws, Kevin, Kate, Michael Deaker, Brian. Have we got everybody? Carmen. And that order. Hilary.
2 questions if they're on both reports. The first is that when you've got other at the bottom of your report, Chair, I would... Other?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
I would quite like to be involved if you're saying the constituency councillors. I'm not sure that I'm a constituency councillor for this necessarily, but I presume you would be visiting the TAs about effluent water quality and things, because that's one of the challenges, and I'd quite like to be involved if there's any, if going along, since it's sort of an urban-y thing, even if it isn't whatever it is, and also anything that you're doing with the DCC on account of I'm from down here, so I would quite like to be involved in either of those two in particular if you're going visiting.
Good as gold. So what I plan, once I've got a list, I'll just circulate that, and then just each councillor who's keen to come along, just let me know, and we'll try and make it all happen. And
likewise, you might want to be visiting government departments about how they step up to the plate when we haven't, so just generally the interaction between us, and I'm just thinking sort of rabbits on the rail trail, just as a government department sort of, hey, you guys need to come to some of these parties. What's that?
So you've been out poisoning on the rail trail.
Just whatever.
But they're all important stakeholders.
Yes, and so if you're visiting either of those two.
Sure.
Secondly, a question for Sarah. I see you met with Fish and Game, and you've said something about that you've put them on your list of people who you're visiting regularly or you have a relationship with. Wasn't it just after that he wrote us a letter saying he wasn't happy with us? Did you know that he was about to write that letter, or is he keeping you in touch with what's going on there?
No, I didn't know that he was going to write that letter. The conversation I have is more at an operational level, in terms of I've recently provided he asked me with my EPA experience, for example, what the process looks like for the plan changes that have gone directly to the Environment Court for planning purposes for him. also too, he reported in the perspective on how he thinks things are going in terms of the planning work that's being done. But I didn't specifically discuss or know about the letter. No.
Cool. Anything else, Hilary?
No.
Cool. Michael?
The workshop, the water workshop that's here, roadshow next Wednesday, how many councillors are going to it?
You and I.
Sorry, what's that
Have
one?
have we received notice of that?
No, you haven't.
No,
That's why I'm asking the question.
But I could go. So it was, from my recollection, it was only open to chairs and chief
No,
executives.
it's not,
and
because my wife's going and she's a councillor from the CODC.
All right. Well, I stand corrected. I can find you the information.
Okay.
So I think it's really important. I expect the regional council to be playing the primary role, actually. In this, it's pretty obvious where, no, I do. Well, good on you, Marion. Of course, you know your governance so well. But the reality
Michael,
is...
Michael, hang on. We're not going to go down that track.
No.
Because
so,
otherwise I'm going to ask...
say,
No, hang on. I'm going to ask you to withdraw those sorts of comments in the future. So I don't...
No, I'm not going to withdraw them.
No, I'm not asking you this time.
By...
Michael, I'm not asking you this time, but I'm suggesting we need to keep it at a level that we don't either personalise or, have a crack. So it's just a warning, okay?
And I'm just answering you back.
Yep.
If I get interjected, I will respond.
I will be consistent around the table.
Excellent.
Okay.
Thank you. Because we're likely to play such a primary role, from what I can see coming out of Wellington, which has just been confirmed by the Chief Executive, I think it's important for as many councillors to be there as we can. So
What is it, Michael?
it's a workshop explaining the three waters. So, for example, my wife's going because she's chair of the Three Waters, or the wastewater part of the Three Waters in Central Otago. And so she's been invited by her mayor and chief executive to go down there. And I'm just thinking, Andrew, I'm assuming you're going and the chief executive, but it might be nice to have a couple of councillors here as well.
If that's the case, that we're able to have more than the chair and the CEO, that's fine by me.
I'm just looking for that.
So on that basis, I'll just flick an email around and just ask for additional attendees. Yep.
Right.
Okay. Kevin.
No, I'm happy. Been answered. Thank you.
Kate.
Thank you, Chair. In light of the comments and thank you, CEO, for the comments you've made about our role in leader on the Jobs for Nature and other projects, and noting that on the 27th of May we set up we look for a structure with iwi and governance to do, and that was in the previous item, for COVID jobs. I'm just wondering whether we can speed that up, that process. I've talked to you about the role of ensuring that we are creating jobs that leave a legacy, not just creating jobs for the job's sake, and the information that we hold in this council, which could give us a clear direction on where we should be encouraging and showing some leadership where those jobs are. And I'm just wondering if there's a motion we could put up that does a working party that assists the development of that group or something now, in order to actually start getting up to speed on it, because I don't think we're up to speed as a governance at least on it at present.
So it's sort of more understanding what's going on out in the community currently, and what gaps potentially could be filled with these projects.
Yeah, and understanding where the absolute need is for some work in biodiversity and or wilding trees or anything like that. And just assisting the corporate team, which we're putting a lot of work on at the moment already, in creating that COVID project group.
Any thoughts, Sarah?
Entirely sure what it is that you're asking me in terms of, are you suggesting that there be a governance tier that has responsibility. I mean, you did have, you've had papers on recovery which have included the work that's been done.
Page 19 of our agenda, that's in the actions, is the COVID-19 recovery framework.
Yes.
And develop a structure that sits below council with iwi and governors.
Yes.
From each ward to work on strategic priorities. Now, that's almost 2 months ago, and I appreciate that's not necessarily easy work. I'm just wondering whether we can help speed that up by having a working party or something, so that we can be in a position to be the leaders that you've just mentioned us would talk about.
Gavin, did you want to make any comment on this topic?
Mr. Chairman, only just to say that our focus has been on participation in the Jobs for Nature groups and the like, to get some structure around how we can feed into that collective decision making. So that's probably all I can add at the moment.
So, apologies, have I misunderstood? Are the governors already involved and I didn't know about it? Apologies. I'm not sure what the governance arm is on that.
Okay, well, when there are opportunities for governors to be involved, like, for example, when MFE came to us and requested a bid from us in very short time, I specifically came to governors and asked for assistance and specifically said that there was an opportunity in the Dunstan ward, and apart from Alexa, I had no response. So all I'm saying is there are opportunities, and I have tried to include governors in those opportunities. If you want something that's more structured, I'm happy to do that.
I think the question is that what we expected? I had thought that we were going to have a structure so that we ensured that we got the best biodiversity or wild and tree solutions for the Otago, giving a lens that focused on having a legacy that is meaningful rather than just creating jobs for jobs' sake, because I think that's where the leadership is required. And I must have misunderstood what that action was about, and apologies if I have. I had thought we were going to have something that all of the ward councillors would have some input into. And I've certainly understood that it could work really well with the regional park thing that Colin Campbell Hunt talked about. So I'm just wondering if you don't want to have a motion today, that's fine. But I thought there was a keenness to get some oversight on that and some leadership from our level.
Is it something that we need to maybe flesh out a bit more with council only in CE time, and just try and get our head around what it would look like, how it would work, what info that would need, and what support or whatever. Okay, thank you, Michael Deaker.
Yeah, I think my question is a follow-up to the last 5 minutes of discussion, because the more I listened to Sarah while she was talking to her CE's report, the more I found it quite staggering, the amount of new challenge that local government has now got in front of it, and the various new partnerships it has to build. And just as Sarah spoke about Three Waters, about job creation, about money for wildlings, about money for wallabies, about the need to show that we're onto it and we're spending it and it's making a difference and there are people actually in work, the more I'm sitting here thinking, God help us, this is massive. It's not like anything we've had to face in regional local government in all my time here, that's for sure. This is a whole new ballgame. And it brings me back to what Kate's just been talking about. How do we keep in touch with this? How do we know what's happening? What is Sarah setting up in ORC to administer, to look after, to manage, to whatever it has to be? Who on the senior management team, apart from Gavin, obviously, who led the bid processes and much of this, is there anybody else who's going to be reporting to us regularly about how this money is being spent, where it's being spent, and for what purpose? I'm just curious, because I sat here thinking, heavens above, this is a new and separate and parallel universe we're moving into. And I want to know how we are going to be kept in touch with it, how we're going to know what's working and what isn't. Have we got a role as members of the Otago Regional Council? Sort of the same questions Kate's asking. I'm sorry that's all a bit vague, but I sat here getting more and more stunned by the implications of what Sarah was reporting back to us.
Yeah, I suppose the other thing coming through from that regional sector group was there are a lot of strands or balls up in the air, and they seem to look like they're going to be landing at different times. So some of the questions to actually get your head round the answers when the answers are still evolving, it's actually really difficult. How is this all going to mesh together? So I suppose I'll just come back to that point. When we do get together, council only time with Sarah, I think we probably need to flesh out what we're asking for and how that ties in from an operational point of view.
Can we just talk about that a little
bit?
Look, they're all really good questions, and I think we need to. The first thing I would say is it's really important to appreciate, I guess, what this council has done and hasn't done in the past. We haven't been strong on implementation. I don't think that's any secret. And so I simply don't have the resource and capability that I need in-house to be able to respond to these things in the kind of structured way that you're talking about right now. What we're working towards is we have got a coordinator position, a biodiversity coordinator position, which we've kind of refocused, that will be a key conduit into what's going on out there versus the role that we play. And you remember we had that conversation about us being a gateway. So the challenge that I have that some regional councils don't have quite so much is that I wasn't able to grab hold of a whole lot of implementation programs and put them up because we don't have them yet, because we're still doing the biodiversity work to determine what the program will look like. We do have some strategies and we know fundamentally what the things are that are really important to us in terms of environmental outcome. But the way that we're approaching this is actually to say we don't have to be have all the ideas, and we don't have to necessarily even own the projects. But the role we play is that leadership or that connector role, so that we can help the people who are doing the work on the ground to position and be able to make bids with us so that they're successful in getting the funding. The next piece that's going to come is that groups don't necessarily need help in executing the work on the ground, but what they will need help with is the fact that they might triple their workforce in one go, that they've been a small operation, like a catchment group, and they've had 1 or 2 employees, and suddenly they're going to have 20. And all of the back office stuff, payroll and HR, health and safety, all of that kind of stuff potentially. So that requires some things to happen. You'll see in my report I had a discussion with Doc, and one of the things I said here is clarity is yet to be determined about how funds will be administered to various groups, although there are existing models, and we support the Freshwater Improvement Fund for Waiwanaka, for example. And I've discussed that with the Department of Conservation, who are actively looking at those models at the moment, and they're not sure yet. So there's a whole lot of stuff to shake down, but you're exactly right. We are actually doing this work through others rather than necessarily delivering it ourselves. If you want to do something different and to overlay the outcomes that we're looking for, I mean, I think we are making sure there's synergy. I mean, we're not supporting things that don't have some connection to what we're trying to achieve. But there's also what I talked about as sort of high risk. The first tranche of funding has gone into quite high risk projects. So what that means is they're not necessarily going to deliver you the enduring outcomes over time. They're more about, hey, there's some work we can do. It might be a bit hit and miss, but we'll get some people into work quickly. But the next tranche, the second tranche that's coming, so there'll be more funding coming, or there's funding coming all the time. Government will be a bit more organised, and we will have to be more traditional in the way that you propose what you're going to achieve, and in some ways more accountable about the way that you propose what you're going to achieve. So there's a bit of time. Absolutely understand that governors would like some involvement and want information. I'm not sure about the way that you want to achieve that. You're looking at your governance structures at the moment, and maybe once you determine, committees or whatever the case may be, that gives us a place. But it's not clear to me right now about how you'd like to do that.
Thank you, Sarah. Brian, Carmen, and then Gretchen, then Kevin.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry, Marion first. Okay. Oh, sorry.
I had my hand for ages ago.
Okay.
Just
Marion.
a very quick comment I want to make is that, and Sarah just touched on it, and no, you touched on it, Andrew. Many of these decisions are going through Cabinet at a rate of knots. And I won't do a personal thing, but what I'm aware of is that consequently there are things going wrong, and there is the whole test for accountability, okay? And that's demanding of us. So what I don't want us to do is set up structures based on sand. Do you see what I mean? It is sand coming out from central government at the moment. It's changing day by day, all the time. And I don't mean that about Three Waters, I mean about funding issues. So yes, for us keeping informed, yes, for a place for us to feed in things, but I would hate to see us set up formal structures. I really like the catchment structure we've got, that catchment support group, which has an end date. It finishes in about 2 months' time. If we were going to do something, it should finish in about 3 months' time. Do you see what I mean? Unless we're going to really tie in with biodiversity. Sorry.
Thank you. So I think I've got Brian, Carmen, Gretchen, Kevin. Have I got that right? Excellent. Brian?
Yeah, I'd just like to talk about structure. I'd like to support Kate in terms of what she's saying. I don't want to talk about the detail in terms of central government. I don't want to talk about the detail in terms of our applications. What I'd really like to support is the concept of working groups for a finite time period to do a job, as Councillor Hobbs has said. So, for example, the catchment group one, that was a working party of a number of councillors, staff, and representatives from the community, given 3, 4 or 5 months basically to come back to this council with recommendations in terms of how to divvy up the 200k, and also ideally how to fit into their big picture, maybe in the short term, in terms of the central government funding. So from a councillor perspective, we're part of that journey, we're part of that conversation, and on behalf of this council we can come back and verbalise that feedback to the other councillors. And I think what Councillor Wilson's talking about is this whole COVID thing. We're right in the middle of it. We're not quite sure when it's going to end. It just could carry on. And we're wanting runs on the board. And our CE is saying, well, what do you want? We've made all these applications. We're waiting for this. And Councillor Hobbs saying that it's shifting sands. But what I'm trying to suggest is that instead of being reactive and waiting for an email to turn up saying, hey, we did it, is actually be proactive, is maybe, a working party that is there just to make sure that we're successful, in a holistic look or whatever, so that you've got that interaction between governance, staff and whoever in a positive sort of forum with a finite date just to work constructively. And I think it's a really good idea, as opposed to, I think what, Sarah's saying, it's under control, but that's fine. We need to work together. And these working parties are a really good idea. We don't need to have lots of them, but finite time, get on with it. Can't say enough about that. Standing committees, my question is to the CE. I'm a little bit surprised that we've come back with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 standing committees, and that excludes transportation and mana to mana and this type of thing. I know from a councillor perspective, we have a chair and a deputy chair, and we have 10 other councillors, and they all want to roll up their sleeves, you know, in standing committees. So you could argue that, you know, 10 divided by 2, if you had co-chairs, is 5 committees. And you know, my question is to the CE, you know, because it's got to work, not only what governance want, you know, the key question is what do staff want to make this an efficient organisation. So, and I see, you know, for example, third bullet point, community implementation, and the final one, you know, community engagement. I'm trying to think how are they sort of different. But, you know, how are these standing? Do you feel confident, you're part of this conversation, Sarah, that this is the way to go? Or you know, or are you going to come back with your ideas? Because it needs to work for everybody.
Before you speak, Sarah, that was the purpose of Gretchen, Michael Laws and myself getting together with Sarah last week.
And I've heard you three speak because we've been as part of the council only. Sure. I'm inviting the CE to speak.
No, fair enough. Sarah.
Thank you. So I understand what you're trying to achieve with the committees, and I don't necessarily have. I think there's different ways of cutting the cloth, and one of the things that we talked about was that you're probably a little bit ahead of where I am in terms of organising the organisation in a way that best responds to a committee framework like that. At the moment, what we have is basically each GM has their own committee. This structure takes us to more of a matrix where you'll have, you know, several GMs reporting into one committee. And they might have 3 or maybe 4 committees that they do that for. That's not necessarily a problem if we can look at things like frequency, because frequency is really important. And I can see where some committees will have a heavy load and other committees won't need to meet as regularly and won't have the same kind of load. I think the other thing which we seem to clarify was that we need the flexibility to be able to bring something to full council that hasn't gone through a committee. And the reason why we need that is because that's part of efficiency. If we don't have that, then that makes it really difficult for us, because remembering that our committees don't have full delegation, so they're not decision-making committees, and all decisions have to go to the next council meeting and effectively be ratified through that. So that creates some inefficiency if we were in a situation where we had to take everything through a committee.
Is this the list you would have come up with?
Oh, look, we worked on the list together. I probably, you know, at the beginning of the triennium, what I was thinking about was less committees. That's what I was kind of aiming for. But I understand, and I think it's about what's right for now. Yeah. Okay. And I think what's really important is that what I'm hearing from you is you want more. It's not necessarily about making decisions, but it's actually about being informed and getting more information. And particularly in the science area, for example, we had a discussion about communications. I did say that my view is communications is kind of part of everything, so I don't know that you need to have a communications committee. The compromise was that I thought there was some merit in having a governance committee, because we don't actually have anywhere where governance goes other than to full council. So if we're talking about things like reviewing standing orders or code of conduct stuff or whatever, there isn't a place. So that's why I suggested, you know, to give it purpose rather than what we've had before with the communications committee, which I think hasn't necessarily been what you've needed. So look, it's fine. What I've asked for is, you know, sort of 6 months grace, if you like, while we bed this in, because we will need to think about how we organise ourselves. It also is complementary to a program management way of working, but we haven't fully implemented program management in the organisation yet. So that's why I say you're sort of a little bit ahead of where I'm at inside the organisation. So there might be some teething issues, and it is important, I think, that there's a level of willingness of all of us to have further conversations if we find that there's too much burden or it's inefficient or whatever the case may be.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Gretchen.
Oh, wasn't it Carmen? That's okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Carmen,
I don't
sorry.
mind.
You go.
Sorry.
Thank you. I'll be very quick if I can try. So this is the CE's report on page 24. Congratulations for the flood protection funding. That's a big boost, 19, 20 and 21. And I would like to also thank Dr. Palmer and his team for doing this. The 64% of the total cost of the projects. But what I was going to ask you was, do you know at this stage where you're going to just evenly spread it around Otago? For one? No, that's what I wanted to know. This is one of my best questions.
There's very specific projects, and
that's
I think
I thought we had that
when I
paper,
sent
didn't
you
we?
the Minister's press release, they were named.
Yes.
And so that's where we have to spend the money.
Yep. You can.
Because they had to be shovel ready.
Which is great.
And that's why I think it was Albert Town. That's why Albert Town wasn't in the mix, because it's not shovel ready within the time frame. And that's what I mean about delivery. That's the message is really strong. If you can't have shovels on the ground by this date, then they're not eligible.
That's fine. I mean, I know you brought that paper, but I just wanted to check that once it's in concrete, that's it can't be changed.
Yes, and we'll need to come back to you once, because there'll be some kind of contract with government. So we'll need to come back to you because of the extent of that from a financial delegation perspective.
And my other question is for you, the Chair. Number 7, you've noted that the Infrastructure Committee is disestablished. Papers either going straight to the State of Environment, Strategy and Planning, Community Implementation or straight to Council. If it's an urgent matter, I actually would fight for this and say that we, Council and Callagher, I felt we were really efficient. That's just my point.
So
the Resilience Committee.
Yes.
So sort of couched in a different.
Yep, that's what I just wanted
heading,
to expand.
Still exists, but under resilience.
Yes, so you sort of shuffled us in another direction.
Sorry.
Perhaps. That's all right. I just wanted to make sure we weren't completely defunct.
Cool.
No.
Yep. No, that's fine.
Not it's just that we didn't think that infrastructure had enough work, to be honest.
Yes.
Because we're not really in the business of building stuff, apart from our flood infrastructure.
Yeah.
Lise Galloway's just resigned as a minister.
Thank you.
Oh.
Gretchen.
Right.
Who has?
What's he done?
Yeah.
That would be to do with the Judith Collins issue this morning.
I could do
You
that
have to have that style of politics at this table.
Yeah. We've got enough to focus on here, I sense. But thank you, Michael. Gretchen.
Thank you. Just quickly, I moved the motion regarding the COVID recovery and the environmental project simply because I thought that it would be helpful to have governors with links to community to help to get things running quickly and understand you've had to really hit the ground running and you've done that yourself. With some input from specific governors. But going forward, I think what I was aiming at was for Otago to be as successful as possible in attracting funding. And to do that, we do need to have partnership with iwi, and we do need to involve people. And I was certainly not thinking of a concrete formalised committee structure or anything like that. It's just harnessing what we've got. We don't really have experience as a council of implementing these types of projects, but around this table we've got a huge amount of experience of implementing exactly these types of projects. Many of us have been on those types of trusts or in other capacities as well, doing exactly that work. We can quickly link into community and get things happening. If that's what we want to do, we can also prioritise work. We've got a good understanding of what is going on in each of our areas. So, yeah, I think it is a working group or something like that we're talking about. And we may well find that a lot of this is happening already, and that's brilliant too. And then we're informed and we can go out and be advocates for this council, knowing exactly what is going on. So, yeah, it's a win-win.
Thank you.
Here.
Look, yeah, just to further to that is really to endorse Councillor Hobbs and Councillor Scott and Councillor Robertson really on the merits of grabbing governors into short-term time frame working parties to get things to jig along. So I think that's very important and a very good direction. Just a comment, Mrs. Garner, that you made about the regional groups getting together, formulating plans from government and then doing it once, and then us doing the implementation at this level. If that's the way we're heading, I think we need to be resourcing that and making sure, because I think as a country we need to do that, and I just think we'll all get great benefits rather than sitting here reinventing things. So it's a very positive step. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other queries? Would someone like to move?
I'm happy to move it for you,
We
Chair.
received the report. Moved Carmen, seconded Kate. And no further discussion. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. That was the chairperson's report. And for the chief executive's report, moved by Kevin, seconded by Marion. No discussion. If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Thank you for that. Just looking at the time, the cunning plan will be if we deal with item 10.2, which is the NES air quality amendment submission, and then the next item has obviously been dealt with in non-public, and then we've got the Kurawao leases. So what I suggest, we will break once we deal with 10.2, and then we'll move into non-public, deal with those questions at the front end of that Kurawao lease agenda item, and then we'll go back into public. That all make sense? Yep. Okay, so we're on 10.2, NES air quality amendment submission.
I'd like to move the...
Thank you. Moved by Hilary, seconded by Kevin. Any discussion?
Yes, please.
Kate.
Sorry, I had a question. Sorry to be...
Yep, no, that's cool. Welcome, Lisa. Welcome, Gwyneth. Question from Kate and then Marion.
Thank you, and I was grateful to have been on the energy infrastructure and something rather RPS group the other day, where Susan Crumdyke was giving her views on air quality and her experience in Canterbury. And one of the ones that I note isn't in here, I think, is a subsidy for ULEB. And I read this ages ago, but I know that I noted it, and I've noted here. Should we be encouraging there to be that they're substantially more expensive? But I don't think there's a subsidy, and I'm sure she said that there was a subsidy in ECAN, and whether we should be working with that.
Through you, Chair. I guess the NESAC submission, we have suggested in here that we do request support from MFE around a range of things, which would include potentially subsidies. I guess what we mentioned last time at the strategy meeting was we have in the past obviously had subsidies as a council, and that's something that we need to consider going forward as part of our whole package on air quality. So, and I know that's something that as a team we're looking at as in reviewing the air quality approach as to what's going to give us, I guess, best bang for the buck and the role of a potential subsidy, whether it's specific to ULEBs or whether it can actually, I mean, if these standards come in and if the standards through NESAC are actually requiring emissions lower than 1 gram per kg, that is kind of encouraging ULEBs by default anyway. So I guess the detail of how a subsidy might apply, and if it's us that are applying that subsidy, would be worked out through the program that we're looking at now at the moment on air quality, rather than through, I guess, the submission to the government on their NESAC regulations.
I presume that I always take the view that it's better to have the rules as a backstop, and that's what the NES is. But providing through ECA a subsidy, which is a government one that we could be suggesting in here as part of our submission, would
us having to come up with a subsidy scheme is much more fraught. And whether, because this is a one to government, that we should be including it in here. But I'm happy if I'm wrong, but I would have thought eco-funding was the obvious one. It certainly would seem to me what ECAN was working with.
I was just, we can consider putting specific suggestions for subsidy funding, but I guess as Lisa was alluding to, we haven't necessarily done the work, and that's part of the review to decide what we think might be the best subsidies in Otago and where we're best to spend that money, and therefore then after that who might actually provide that subsidy. So yeah, up to you guys in terms of if you want us to specify specific subsidies in this submission.
I'm a little bit nervous that we're going to relitigate our discussion previously. So I'm just mindful that we did give this a really good crack.
I appreciate that, and it's only because I did the RPS meeting the other day where Susan Cromduck said that was a really good way. And I don't mind using that as an example, but we're going to be on the back foot if the rules come in and people have to transfer over. We should be doing them both together. That's all. And if it's ECA, then it's government.
Okay. Thank you. Marion, Brian, Kevin.
Okay,
Michael,
first I want to understand something. You put up 2 letters, 2 submissions. They are both the same, except, thank you. I thought I was going mad at some stage last night.
We just thought we'd put the second one in there, which is the track changes, so we can easily see what we changed.
Second thing I want to say is thank you very much for including the port. That was actually relevant because of this morning's message, and then I absolutely appreciated that because that is absent from the current air quality in ES. Just picking up that point that was just being made by Kate, as I read it in your submission, and just tell me if I'm right or wrong, but as I read it, you said there's regulatory, taking it down, and there is non-regulatory, and the non-regulatory included such things as subsidies. That's specified in here, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay, that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Right.
Yeah, just quickly, thank you for incorporating our feedback, particularly in relation to changes to the Building Act. I do point out on page 41, first bullet point, refers to insultation standards, and whether that's something that's come out of government, so I'm not quite sure.
Standing orders, Thank you for picking that up.
Wonderful new word. We'll be using that again.
Insultation.
That's
right.
Like it.
Just on policy considerations number 11, we're in a consultative process for our own RPA, which is correct. So are we making our stakeholders aware of the direction of the national air quality standards and that they will be applied once gazetted? So whatever we do is going to be maybe usurped and we have to act straight away, don't we?
Yes, through you, Chair. So when we had the reference group, you referring to the reference groups for the RPS and the work we're doing through that, when we had the reference group on the air quality there was discussion around what the NESAC regulations were going to, I guess, set as the rules. So everybody involved in that discussion is aware, I guess, of the parameters of then what the RPS then does.
Michael Deaker, then Michael Laws.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I want to ask through you where our support for the Cosy Home Trust fits into all this, particularly the suggestion that's already been made of subsidies to assist people towards ultra-low emission burners, which are damnably expensive. And there'll be a lot of homes in Otago which might well benefit from support of the Cosy Homes Trust. And that can only operate if we continue to support them.
Derek.
I was just going to say, I think I agree that it's a conversation that needs to be had. I think it's more of an LTP conversation than a conversation that's relevant to this paper, but yes, agree that it is the conversation we need to have about air.
Thank you. Michael Laws.
I've got a question, then a comment. The question is related to the Appendix 1 attached to this. It's on page 81 of my paper, but it relates to something called synthetic PMT 2.5. And then as I look down to a number of exceedances for Cromwell, just as an example, there is synthetic PM 2.5. I know that there's not a 2.5 measurement in Cromwell. So how do you get that figure? Have you just made it up?
No, we won't have made it up, but unfortunately I don't have Sarah, our scientist, online. She was at the discussion at the committee meeting, but I can take the question on notice.
Well, it's just that you're asking us to approve a submission, and at the moment there is no 2.5 measurement standard in Cromwell, and yet there is the standard. I'll tell you what, we've got the council meeting is going to last a little bit longer, so it'd be nice to get that response back. I suspect that synthetic 2.5 is made up, and in actual fact it composes of an extrapolation of data.
Which is what you said here.
That's what I...
But hang on. So we just...
So therefore...
Michael, we just need clarification rather than any suggestion that there's something else. Gwyneth...
Well, and then there was the second issue?
Well, hang on, we just deal with the first one first. So that attachment at the back, is that going to accompany the submission?
Yes.
Okay. So are we able to have that answer?
Yeah, I can make contact with our scientist and understand. We believe it's work done through NIWA, but we can try and make that happen before the end of the council meeting.
Lovely. Sorry, I'm sorry.
Oh,
Are you accusing the staff of...
Oh, for Pete's sake.
No, sorry.
There's no accusation here.
Well,
Michael,
no,
please
you're
just let
suggesting that
Sarah...
the staff have made up a number, and I'm trying to understand.
No, it's a made-up number. That's what I'm saying. There is no measurement of 2.5 quality in Cromwell, so where does it come from?
So we're seeking clarification. We're not suggesting anything else other than we're posing a question, and we would just like clarity on that question. Okay. Second point, Michael.
In the summary on page 78, and there are a series of bullet points, we seem to be missing one. And that is that earlier on in the paper, we talk about energy poverty. In other words, the inability of people to be able to perform with alternative energy sources to keep themselves warm. I think we definitely need to put it there.
It's in there, isn't it?
Where is it then? Where is it, Brian?
Well,
it's not there.
Hang on, just let Lisa respond.
Can I just clarify, Councillor Laws, is that under the summary dot points on the last page of the submission before the attachment?
Yeah, so that's the bullet points that are on page 79 and 80.
One of ours.
Final bullet point.
And one of the big issues there has been, which we discussed at the last count. Where is it? You pointed
Page 41. Final bullet point.
Yeah, the final bullet point of our whole submission is
That's
asking
consideration
MFE
by MFE for a multi-agency to address air quality across a range of parameters. Is that the one you're talking about?
Yes, and this may include. Yeah, it may include building regulations,
barriers, etc. Yes, and that's what I mean. It's not there.
The final sentence, it says subsidies and funding and electricity pricing, education.
Sorry, it's not there. We are talking about energy poverty. We're talking about the ability of people to be able to afford any alternative forms, and really we don't have it as a separate bullet point.
I'm just going to ask Lisa to read out what you've got in front of you in reference to the point that Michael Laws is making.
Yes,
please.
Through you, Chair. The final bullet point reads as consideration by MFE for a multi-agency collaborative program to address air quality across a range of parameters outside of the NESAC regulations. This may include building regulation, barriers to uptake of cleaner fuels, subsidies and funding, education programs and public health support.
Yeah, electricity prices, so you just slipped over that, didn't you?
So in drafting that, I guess we had, our thinking was the barriers to uptake cleaner fuels was, I guess, the summary to include electricity prices and energy poverty, but we can add, if you would like, specifically those words into that dot point.
Is the general consensus that additional comment about the poverty aspect be included?
Yes.
Everyone comfortable? Okay, excellent. Gary.
Thank you. Look, I think following on from Councillor Laws too, I don't want to relitigate what we discussed last time. I'm going to vote against both of the recommendations. I'm concerned at the overall message and tone of the submissions. I don't think they fully highlight the situation as it sits, especially in Central Otago, but our other colder towns, I don't believe we are giving a clear message to central government that what is proposed will make people warmer and healthier. I think it's going to make them colder. So that's my position. Thank you.
Any further speakers? It's been moved and seconded. Councillor Calvert. We'll give Hillary, Alexa, Michael, Laws.
Just a thought about page 81 that Councillor Laws was talking about earlier. I'm wondering whether when it says the ratios used were developed based on information from New Zealand studies where PM 2.5 and whatever were monitored concurrently with adjustments made for Otago locations.
Exactly.
Looks to me like that's not a monitored situation, it's a modelling situation. Is that why it's...
Gwyneth is going to follow that and come back to us. Clarify that. Thank you. Alexa.
I think this is pretty good, actually. I quite like this whole submission. I've got two worries. And one is that, and you have referred to it, but I'm not sure if it's enough, is that a multi-agency response is needed. I mean, this goes back to how we build our houses, frankly. And I have some sympathy for what Gary's saying about it's not necessarily going to make things warmer, though I still think it's the right signals to send, so I will be supporting it. But I'm wondering how we look at the multi-agency response, how we actually send, and this goes to the affordable housing one coming up later in one of the remits as well. But how are we going to start building houses that are warm, that are situated properly to the sun, and that perform properly? And I'd like to see that strengthened in here, even though it doesn't seem that it's quite the right thing to do. I mean, it's not totally on point. And the second one is how are we going to enforce this? Enforcement and compliance. And we're already pretty poor at enforcement and compliance and monitoring, and I'm wondering how we're going to do that.
Tessa, Gwyneth, any comments?
Sorry, I was talking over the top of the second one, so I might need you to. So we can, if you want to suggest some wording, increase the emphasis around the multi-agency response. Lisa and I were just discussing, though, I guess there's potential for another option here because it's really around the non-regulatory response as opposed to the regulatory thing, and this is an NES air quality submission. We are, I guess, as part of our review and starting to, we're already talking, but we're continuing the conversations with some of the other agencies around air in Otago. So that is part of the conversation, in terms of that review process that we're going through this year. But if you would like it to occur at the national, and you would like to send it at the national level, that multi-agency work, then perhaps we could send another letter to MFE outside this submission process, rather than it being lost in an NES submission process. So that's just a suggestion on the table.
Good call.
I think that's a good idea. Yeah, I like it. The other one was compliance and monitoring. How we're going to do that.
Monitoring against the
standards. We're going to bring 2.5. A standard looks like it's going to come in at 2.5. Yep. Our monitoring, compliance and enforcement's already fairly poor. We've seen that in the last regulatory meeting report. So how are we thinking we might take this on?
So in terms of the monitoring program, I think we indicated at our committee meeting that we have a program to roll out the 2.5 monitoring stations, and that's underway. So that will continue. Yep. So that's the monitoring side of it. In terms of compliance, I don't know, Richard, if you want to talk about air compliance under the new standards, or anything to follow.
That'll come through separately at a later date by the sound of that. Okay. I want to wrap this up, but Michael,
I just want to support Councillor Kelleher, and I won't be voting for the submission either. If you go to page, and first of all general and then a specific, the general is that I think we're into a bit of virtue signalling here with this submission, and that we're trying to get ahead of government policy. And now we go to the specific to illustrate that. If you go to page 76 in the second bullet point under ORC support for NSAC amendments, you will see in the second bullet point exactly what I'm talking about. In fact, we make a dreadful comment, I think, and it goes, however, as set out in the following sections of the submission, ORC's position is that it might not go far enough. Now, what that is saying in that submission and in that bullet point very clearly, and I'm telling you the reasons why I cannot support this submission, very clearly is that we are trying to, in actual fact, signal that we think that the current government standard won't actually work and we should go further. Now, I totally resist that on behalf of my constituents. The reality is, as already Councillor Forbes and Councillor Keller have pointed out, there is going to be a diminution of heat and of economic heat if we enforce these processes and if we start to get more virtuous than what government policy is suggesting. Now, it would be different if we were saying we don't think it's going to make any difference, and that's fine, but we've gone further than that. We've said it doesn't go far enough. And what we're suggesting is that we want tighter standards than those are currently being suggested by the government. In Central Otago, that would simply be disastrous. And the cold would be a potential killer because people would not be able to afford the alternative forms of energy, with electricity prices already skyrocketing and making it so uneconomic for so many families. So I'm worried about the tenor of this submission. I think that we haven't highlighted sufficiently the extreme cold conditions that we face in Central Otago and in Queenstown, and that the only fuel source available for many, many families and communities is the burning of fuel.
Thank you.
Question.
I don't want to...
Okay, we don't want to debate it, but there is other issues involved here.
Okay.
That's very reductive argument.
I asked the motion to be put.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, okay.
One comment I want to make is that we had a really good session with this at Strategy and Planning, and I feel that forum is the time to really flesh out all these issues, and some of the issues have been repeated today, and there's been some new ones as well. And I think we don't want to make a habit of this, so I'll leave it as that. But Kevin, your last speaker, and then I'll put the motion.
Just a question. Are we in some areas, by my recollection, actually using 0.75?
0.7. So through you, Chair, our air plan at the moment has a rule of in Air Zone 1 towns that the emission standard is 0.7. So that's what I guess this submission was based on, and also based on the air strategy, which Council adopted air strategy, which states that we are going to be encouraging our communities to move to ULEB burners as a way of helping to address air quality in Otago, and going below, I guess, the 1 gram per kg, which NESAC is suggesting is one way of helping moving towards ULEB. So this is, I guess, consistent with the strategy as well as our current air plan rules for Air Zone 1.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you. So it's been moved that we receive the report, and number 2, that we approve the attached submission to be submitted to the Minister of the Environment by 31 July. I'll put the motion. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against?
No.
No.
And do you want those recorded,
Yes, please.
Michael and Gary?
Yes, please.
And Carmen? Okay, thank you. Right, so what I suggest now is that we stand adjourned with the public council meeting for, say, 15 minutes, and I will then move into non-public, and then we'll deal with the Korowao lease issue, the non-public aspect of it, and then move back into public to deal with the substantive.
Cup of tea, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, so we're going to break for 10 minutes for a cup of tea. Well, you did have 15 before, you've now got 10.
Oh.
Sorry.
Will you do the other public excluded matters while you're in the public excluded?
When we come back.
Yeah. Are you doing the report in the public exclusion? It's on workshop.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah.
She fired him. Inappropriate relationship with staff.
It's called the silly season, isn't it?
No, this is a new form of moral censorship. That would never have happened in the past.
I'm totally lost as to
Stay away from the kids. White pen.
Go up to the,
you know, keep away from the kids.
what's the Kurawau Islands all the way up to
When you have lost it.
the person who's
You have to sit myself as well. Condemned by
Because I bought the last one and the kids got my check there, right? I have learned that, isn't it? And they'll normally have a
non-public for different matters, changing the order of the agenda.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I was just looking for something online. But anyway, so the plan is moving it on public. So you're happy to move?
I think we need to confirm or alter the agenda.
Yep. So
outside of in public.
Yep. So okay. The agenda now will be that we'll move into non-public to deal with the performance review of the CEO. We will then deal with the bus fare. The commissioner appointment for the hearing to do with the bus fares. Then we will deal with Kurawau. Thank you. And then after that, we'll move into public. And to deal with the Kurawau. And what I'm thinking is that could well be later on in the afternoon, that public part, because we're going to run out of time. Okay. So anyway.
Just to keep to timetable.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the reason. You're moving, Kate. Second by Hillary. Yeah. Any discussion? If not, put the motion.
Aye.
Aye. Against?
I'll now move.
Carried.
There we go.